The moment people judge you by your skin instead of your character is the moment they reveal who they truly are. Every officer inside the station stood perfectly still, shoulders squared, eyes fixed forward, their right hands raised in a crisp salute. The room, usually filled with ringing phones and hurried conversations, had fallen into complete silence. No one dared whisper. No one dared move. At the center of the room stood a tall black man in a simple charcoal jacket, his silver hair neatly trimmed, his posture calm and unwavering. His wrists were no longer restrained, yet he carried himself with the same quiet dignity he had shown from the very beginning. Across from him, Officer Daniel Brooks struggled to lift his trembling hand into the same salute as everyone else. Only 45 minutes earlier, he had laughed at the very idea that this man could be anyone important. 45 minutes earlier, he had called him a liar in front of strangers. 45 minutes earlier, he had believed a uniform was the only thing that defined authority. Now every eye in the station watched as that belief collapsed without a single raised voice. The order had come directly from the Pentagon. No debate. No delay. No exceptions. But to understand why an entire police station found itself saluting the very man it had treated like a suspect, we have to go back to where it all began. Earlier that afternoon, the streets of Arlington, Virginia, carried the familiar rhythm of a late spring weekday. Office workers hurried across intersections with coffee cups in hand. Delivery trucks rolled through downtown traffic. American flags fluttered gently outside government buildings under a bright blue sky. Among the crowd walked General Marcus Ellison, carrying nothing more than a small leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. He wore no dress uniform. No medals. No stars on his shoulders. Just a navy button-down shirt, dark slacks, polished brown shoes, and the relaxed confidence of a man who no longer needed appearances to prove his accomplishments. After nearly 4 decades of military service, Marcus had learned that true leadership rarely announced itself. He had just concluded a classified strategy meeting less than a mile away at the Pentagon and decided to enjoy the short walk before meeting an old friend for lunch. The city felt peaceful. Ordinary. The kind of afternoon that reminded him why so many people devoted their lives to protecting this country. As he approached a crosswalk, Marcus noticed an elderly veteran struggling with several grocery bags that had split open across the sidewalk. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, knelt carefully, and helped gather canned food, bread, and fresh fruit scattered across the pavement. The older man smiled gratefully. "Thank you, son," he said. Marcus simply smiled back. "We're all on the same team." Neither of them noticed the patrol cruiser slowing to a stop across the street. Behind the windshield, Officer Daniel Brooks narrowed his eyes. From his perspective, all he saw was a black man standing near another citizen beside a busy intersection, carrying an unfamiliar leather case and speaking with quiet confidence. Something about the scene made Brooks suspicious before he even opened his door. Sometimes prejudice doesn't begin with words. Sometimes it begins with an assumption. And assumptions, left unchecked, have a way of changing far more than a single afternoon. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped out of his patrol vehicle with the measured confidence of someone who believed experience had taught him everything worth knowing. The late afternoon sun reflected off his badge as he adjusted his duty belt and crossed the street without urgency, his eyes fixed on Marcus Ellison from the moment he closed the car door. Around them, traffic flowed normally, pedestrians continued toward offices and restaurants, and the sounds of the city blended into a familiar rhythm that gave no hint of how quickly ordinary moments could change. Marcus finished placing the final grocery bag into the elderly veteran's shopping cart before offering a respectful nod. The older man thanked him once more and slowly continued toward the parking lot, unaware that another conversation was already beginning behind him. "Sir, I need a moment of your time," Brooks called out. Marcus turned calmly, his expression relaxed and courteous. Years of military service had taught him that every encounter deserved respect before judgment. "Of course, officer. How can I help you?" Brooks studied him carefully. There was something about Marcus that unsettled him. It was not the expensive watch hidden beneath the cuff of his sleeve or the disciplined posture that came naturally after decades of service. It was the quiet confidence. The kind that did not seek approval from anyone. Brooks had encountered confident people before, but this felt different, and instead of making him curious, it made him skeptical. "Can I see some identification?" Brooks asked. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced his driver's license along with a government identification card inside a protective holder. He extended both documents with steady hands. Brooks barely glanced at the driver's license before his attention shifted to the second card. The seal printed across the top immediately suggested military service, but instead of examining it carefully, he frowned. "Where did you get this?" Marcus remained composed. "It was issued to me by the Department of Defense." Brooks tilted the card slightly before lowering it. "You expect me to believe that?" Marcus answered with the same even tone. "You asked for identification. I provided it." Several people walking nearby slowed their pace, sensing the conversation growing unusually tense. One young woman standing outside a coffee shop paused with her phone still in her hand, quietly observing from a distance. Brooks folded his arms. "I have seen fake credentials before." Marcus nodded once, showing neither frustration nor fear. "Then you also know they should be verified before reaching conclusions." Instead of accepting the suggestion, Brooks interpreted it as a challenge. His posture stiffened. "Are you telling me how to do my job?" Marcus shook his head gently. "No, officer. I am asking that you follow the proper procedure." The words were respectful, but Brooks heard them differently. Behind years of assumptions and unchecked confidence, simple professionalism suddenly felt like defiance. He requested Marcus remain where he was while he contacted dispatch. Marcus agreed without hesitation. He had nothing to hide and nowhere urgent to be. The dispatcher requested the identification number from the military credential, but Brooks hesitated. Rather than reading the number exactly as printed, he questioned whether it was worth checking at all. In his mind, the answer had already been decided. A second patrol vehicle arrived minutes later. Officer Ryan Collins stepped out, glanced briefly toward Marcus, then toward Brooks, waiting for an explanation. Brooks quietly summarized the situation, ending with a dismissive shrug. "He wants us to believe he is somebody important." Marcus stood several feet away, hands visible, shoulders relaxed, watching the exchange without interruption. His silence confused Collins. Most people in similar situations argued, protested, or demanded immediate answers. Marcus did none of those things. He simply waited, as though experience had taught him that truth never needed to rush ahead of itself. Officer Ryan Collins accepted the identification card from Brooks and turned it over in his hands with greater care. Unlike his partner, he actually read the official markings, tracing the embossed seal with his thumb before looking back at Marcus. For just a fraction of a second, uncertainty crossed his face. "This looks authentic," he said quietly. Brooks dismissed the observation with a short laugh. "Anybody can make something look authentic these days." Marcus remained exactly where he had been asked to stand. His breathing was steady. His expression never changed. Years spent making difficult decisions under extraordinary pressure had taught him that patience often revealed more about people than confrontation ever could. Collins looked toward Marcus again. "Sir, would you mind explaining why you are carrying a Department of Defense credential while dressed in civilian clothes?" Marcus answered politely. "I attended a meeting this afternoon. I am off duty now." Brooks folded his arms tighter. "A meeting where?" "The Pentagon." Brooks smiled with obvious disbelief. "That is a convenient answer." Marcus simply nodded. "It is also the truthful one." The small crowd nearby continued to grow. Office employees leaving work slowed their pace. A delivery driver remained inside his truck with the window lowered. The young woman outside the coffee shop quietly started recording, sensing that something important was unfolding. Nobody shouted. Nobody interrupted. The entire scene was carried by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. Brooks stepped closer, still holding Marcus's identification. What exactly is your rank? Marcus looked directly into his eyes. Brigadier General. The answer should have invited verification. Instead, it produced another skeptical smile. Brooks shook his head slowly. Do you know how many people claim to be somebody important when they get stopped? Marcus replied with complete composure. I imagine quite a few. Fortunately, there are procedures designed to determine the truth. Collins glanced at Brooks. We could contact military authorities and verify everything in just a few minutes. Brooks answered without taking his eyes off Marcus. Or we could stop wasting time on a story that is obviously made up. Marcus noticed Collins hesitate again. The younger officer appeared less interested in proving someone wrong than in making sure everyone followed proper procedure. Marcus respected that. Leadership had taught him long ago that organizations often reflected the decisions of individuals willing to ask one more question before reaching a conclusion. Brooks returned the driver's license but kept the military credential in his hand. If you really are who you claim to be, proving it should not be difficult. Marcus answered calmly. I agree completely. Brooks took another step forward. Then you will come with us until we sort this out. Marcus looked briefly toward the pedestrians watching from across the sidewalk before returning his attention to Brooks. Officer, I am fully willing to cooperate. I only ask that you verify my identification before making assumptions. Brooks interpreted the request as resistance disguised by polite language. We are beyond requests now. Collins shifted uneasily. Daniel, dispatch is still waiting if we want them to. Run the credential number. Brooks ignored him. His confidence had become anchored to his first impression, and every new piece of information only pushed him deeper into defending it. Marcus slowly folded his hands in front of him, maintaining the same composed posture that had impressed soldiers under his command for decades. He neither argued nor attempted to leave. He understood something the officers did not. Reputation could survive misunderstanding. Character could survive humiliation. But decisions made without facts often carried consequences far beyond the moment in which they were made. As another patrol vehicle quietly pulled up along the curb and more officers stepped onto the sidewalk, Marcus lifted his eyes toward the American flag waving above a nearby federal building. The breeze remained gentle. The afternoon remained beautiful. Yet somewhere inside the Pentagon, a meeting had just ended, and several senior officials were beginning to notice that one distinguished officer had unexpectedly stopped answering his secure phone. Marcus offered no resistance as Officer Daniel Brooks instructed him to walk toward the waiting patrol vehicle. He moved with quiet composure, neither lowering his head nor allowing frustration to show across his face. The growing crowd watched in complete silence. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Others continued recording, sensing that the situation felt strangely out of place. There was something about the older man's calm demeanor that did not match the story unfolding in front of them. Most people placed in an uncomfortable public situation tried desperately to explain themselves. Marcus did not. He simply trusted that facts, when finally examined, would speak louder than assumptions. Officer Ryan Collins opened the rear passenger door before quietly leaning closer to Brooks. We should still verify that credential before we take this any further. Brooks answered without hesitation. We will sort everything out at the station. Collins looked back toward Marcus. Sir, do you understand why we are asking you to come with us? Marcus met his eyes with the same steady expression. I understand what you believe. I only hope you are willing to verify what you have been shown. Those words lingered in Collins's mind as Marcus entered the vehicle without complaint. The door closed gently. There was no shouting. No struggle. Only an uncomfortable silence that seemed heavier than the afternoon air itself. As the patrol vehicles pulled away from the curb, the young woman outside the coffee shop lowered her phone and quietly uploaded the recording she had captured over the past several minutes. She typed only a few words beneath the video. Something about this does not feel right. Within moments, the clip began reaching viewers far beyond Arlington. Inside the patrol vehicle, Marcus looked through the window as familiar government buildings passed by one after another. His secure phone remained inside his leather portfolio, untouched since leaving the Pentagon earlier that afternoon. Scheduled calls continued arriving one after another. Each unanswered notification triggered additional concern inside offices where punctuality and communication were never taken lightly. Several miles away, inside a secure conference room, Lieutenant General Rebecca Morrison glanced toward the empty chair where Marcus had been sitting less than an hour earlier. She checked the time once more before looking toward her executive assistant. "Has General Ellison responded?" The assistant shook his head. "No, His secure device has not acknowledged any messages." Rebecca frowned. Marcus had served alongside her for years. He had never ignored an operational communication without reason. Never once. "Contact his driver." The answer came back almost immediately. General Ellison declined transportation today. He said he wanted to enjoy the walk before lunch. Rebecca exchanged a concerned glance with another senior officer seated nearby. "He should have arrived 30 minutes ago." Back at the Arlington Police Department, the afternoon routine continued as officers filed reports, dispatchers answered emergency calls, and visitors moved through the front lobby. Few noticed when Brooks and Collins escorted Marcus inside. The desk sergeant looked up briefly before returning to his paperwork. Marcus stood quietly near the front counter while Brooks carried the identification card toward an interview room. Collins watched him disappear down the hallway before turning back toward Marcus. "Would you like some water while we work through this?" Marcus smiled politely. "Thank you. That would be appreciated." Collins returned a minute later with a paper cup. Marcus accepted it with genuine gratitude. "I appreciate your professionalism, officer." Collins nodded awkwardly. "I just want to make sure we get this right." Marcus looked around the station with thoughtful eyes before answering softly. "The easiest mistakes to make are often the ones we believe we have already solved." Collins reflected on those words as a dispatcher suddenly called from across the room. "Officer Brooks, there is someone from the Department of Defense asking to speak with whoever has General Marcus Ellison. They say the matter is urgent." Officer Daniel Brooks barely looked up from his desk when the dispatcher repeated the message. "Tell them they can wait," he answered flatly before reaching for another report. The dispatcher hesitated. "They specifically asked for General Marcus Ellison." Brooks gave a dismissive wave. "That is exactly the problem. Everybody suddenly wants to call him a general." Across the room, Officer Ryan Collins exchanged another uneasy glance with Marcus, who remained seated quietly with the untouched paper cup resting beside him. Marcus neither interrupted nor attempted to insert himself into the conversation. He simply waited with remarkable patience, as though he had long accepted that truth often arrived more slowly than assumption. The dispatcher reluctantly returned to the phone. "Sir, the officer handling the investigation is currently unavailable." A calm voice answered from the other end. "This is Colonel Nathan Hayes from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Please inform your commanding officer that this matter cannot wait." The dispatcher swallowed hard. Something in the colonel's measured tone carried a level of authority that could not be mistaken. Before she could respond, another phone on the communications desk began ringing. Then another. Within less than 2 minutes, 3 separate lines were active at the same time. One caller identified himself as a Pentagon operations officer. Another requested confirmation that General Ellison was safe. A third simply asked to speak with the watch commander immediately. The normal rhythm inside the station began to change. Officers walking through the hallway slowed their pace as dispatch quietly relayed message after message toward the supervisor's office. Even those who knew nothing about Marcus could sense that something unusually important was unfolding. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her office after hearing her name called twice in rapid succession. She accepted one of the phones from the dispatcher. "This is Lieutenant Mitchell." She listened silently for nearly 30 seconds, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When the call ended, she looked directly toward Brooks. "Daniel, I need the identification you collected." Brooks looked surprised. "Why?" Because the Department of Defense has called this station 3 times in the last 5 minutes. Brooks shrugged. That does not prove anything. Mitchell answered carefully. No. But it proves enough for me to verify the facts before reaching another conclusion. Brooks reluctantly handed over the credential. Mitchell examined it with far more attention than anyone else had. She immediately recognized several security features that were impossible to reproduce with ordinary equipment. Without another word, she walked briskly toward her office and closed the door. Collins watched Marcus, expecting him to show relief. Instead, Marcus remained exactly as composed as he had been since arriving. He looked around the station with quiet curiosity, occasionally offering a polite smile to employees who happened to make eye contact. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the growing tension surrounding him. Outside, the afternoon sunlight reflected across the front windows of the station as 2 black sport utility vehicles turned slowly into the parking lot. They carried no flashing lights and made no dramatic entrance, yet every officer who happened to glance outside noticed the small Department of Defense parking placards displayed behind the windshields. The vehicles came to a smooth stop near the entrance, but nobody stepped out immediately. It was almost as though the people inside were waiting for someone to make the right decision first. Inside her office, Lieutenant Mitchell finished another phone call and slowly lowered the receiver. She took a long breath before standing. The confidence in her posture had been replaced by unmistakable concern. As she opened the office door, every conversation near the front desk seemed to fade on its own. Looking directly toward the station commander, she spoke in a calm but unmistakably urgent voice. Chief, I believe we have made a very serious mistake, and the next call is coming directly from the Pentagon. Chief Harold Bennett stepped out of his office the moment Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell finished speaking. He had served in law enforcement for more than 25 years, and experience had taught him that urgency rarely announced itself twice. He accepted the military credential from Mitchell, studying every detail beneath the bright station lights before looking toward Marcus Ellison, who remained seated with the same composed expression he had worn since arriving. There was no anger in Marcus's eyes. No impatience. Only quiet confidence, as though he understood that truth had finally begun catching up with assumption. Before Bennett could say a word, the secure phone inside his office rang again. Mitchell answered first, listened for only a few seconds, then silently handed the receiver to the chief. "Sir," she whispered, "it is the office of the Secretary of Defense." Bennett closed the office door behind him. The station outside continued operating, but conversations became softer as officers noticed the unusual tension spreading through the building. Collins stood near the front desk, unable to take his eyes off Marcus. Brooks remained convinced that everything would soon be explained away, yet even he could no longer ignore the growing number of official calls arriving from Washington. Inside the office, Bennett introduced himself. The voice on the other end remained calm, measured, and unmistakably authoritative. "Chief Bennett, this is Deputy Secretary William Foster. I need you to listen carefully because every minute matters." Bennett straightened instinctively. "Yes, sir. Your department currently has Brigadier General Marcus Ellison inside your station. Is that correct?" Bennett glanced through the office window toward Marcus before answering quietly. "Yes, sir." A brief silence followed. Chief, General Ellison is one of the senior officers overseeing an active national defense modernization initiative. He concluded classified meetings at the Pentagon this afternoon. Multiple federal agencies have been attempting to locate him after scheduled communications unexpectedly stopped. We have now confirmed that your officers made contact with him. Bennett felt the weight of every word settle across his shoulders. "Sir, we are verifying his identification now." The reply came immediately. "Verification has already been completed on our end. His credentials are authentic. His identity is confirmed. Effective immediately, General Ellison is to be treated with every courtesy and professional respect appropriate to his office." Bennett closed his eyes for a brief moment. Years of leadership had taught him that mistakes were inevitable. Refusing to correct them was not. "Understood, sir." The Deputy Secretary continued. There will be no public statement from our office at this time. We expect cooperation, transparency, and professionalism. General Ellison has consistently demonstrated extraordinary character throughout his career. We trust that your department will now demonstrate the same. The line disconnected. Bennett remained motionless for several seconds before slowly lowering the receiver. Outside his office, dispatch received yet another confirmation call, this time from the Pentagon Operations Center, followed almost immediately by a message from the Department of the Army verifying General Ellison's current assignment. Every new call pointed toward the same unavoidable truth. Mitchell watched the chief emerge from his office. She did not need to ask what he had heard. His expression answered the question before he spoke. Brooks stepped forward first. "Chief, what is going on?" Bennett looked directly at him. His voice remained controlled, but every word carried unmistakable authority. "General Marcus Ellison is exactly who he said he was from the beginning." The room fell silent. Collins lowered his eyes for a moment, replaying every conversation that had taken place since the stop on the sidewalk. Brooks stared across the station toward Marcus, struggling to reconcile the image before him with the assumptions he had defended only minutes earlier. At that exact moment, the front entrance opened quietly. Two senior Department of Defense officials in business attire entered without haste, accompanied by a uniformed Army colonel. They walked calmly toward the front desk, and the colonel spoke with respectful clarity. "Good afternoon. We are here to escort Brigadier General Marcus Ellison, and we have direct instructions from the Pentagon regarding what must happen next." The Army colonel stopped a few feet from Marcus Ellison before offering a precise salute that reflected decades of discipline rather than ceremony. Marcus returned the gesture with quiet respect, then lowered his hand. The entire station watched without speaking. Only moments earlier, many of them had viewed him as an ordinary citizen whose words could be dismissed. Now every person in the room witnessed the unmistakable respect shown by officers entrusted with the nation's highest responsibilities. Chief Harold Bennett stepped forward first. "General Ellison," he said carefully, "on behalf of this department, I sincerely apologize for what has happened today. We should have verified the facts before making assumptions." Marcus met the chief's eyes with the same calm expression that had never left his face. "Chief, professionalism is measured most clearly when mistakes are acknowledged and corrected." There was no bitterness in his voice. No desire to embarrass anyone. His words carried the quiet confidence of a leader who understood that humility often required more strength than authority alone. The Department of Defense officials exchanged respectful glances before one of them handed Chief Bennett a sealed document. The chief opened it, reading silently for several seconds. His expression grew increasingly solemn. He looked toward every officer gathered near the front desk before carefully folding the letter closed. "This instruction comes directly from the Pentagon," he said. Every conversation disappeared. Dispatchers stopped typing. Visitors waiting in the lobby looked through the glass doors into the main room, sensing the extraordinary stillness settling over the station. Bennett drew a slow breath. Effective immediately, Brigadier General Marcus Ellison is to be recognized with the honors appropriate to his rank while he departs this facility. Officer Daniel Brooks stared at the chief in disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, but no words followed. Collins quietly lowered his eyes, already understanding what was about to happen. Bennett turned toward his officers. "Everyone present," he said in a steady voice, "stand at attention." Chairs slid softly across the floor as officers rose together. Papers were set aside. Radios became silent. Even the ringing telephone seemed strangely distant against the weight of the moment. Bennett's voice remained calm but unmistakably firm. "Prepare to render honors." Brooks hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then, following the lawful order of his chief, he straightened his posture beside every other officer in the room. Marcus remained exactly where he was, showing no sign of satisfaction or triumph. He had never asked for recognition. He had never demanded respect. He had simply asked that the truth be verified. Bennett looked directly toward Marcus before issuing the final command. "Salute." As one, every officer raised a hand. The movement echoed through the station with remarkable precision. Brooks slowly lifted his own hand, his expression reflecting the realization that certainty built on assumptions could collapse in an instant when confronted by truth. Collins completed the salute with genuine respect, grateful that integrity had finally guided the moment to its proper conclusion. Marcus acknowledged the gesture with a quiet nod before returning the salute one final time. No applause followed. No celebration. Only silence filled the room, a silence shaped by reflection rather than fear. After lowering his hand, Marcus looked across the faces before him. A uniform deserves respect, he said softly, but respect becomes meaningful only when it is offered without prejudice. Every person who walks through your doors deserves the same careful attention to truth, whether they wear stars on their shoulders or none at all. No one answered because nothing needed to be added. In that single moment, every badge in the room seemed lighter than the lesson each officer would carry long after the salute had ended. The salute ended, but its meaning lingered long after every hand returned to each officer's side. The station remained unusually quiet as the Department of Defense officials exchanged a few final words with Chief Harold Bennett before preparing to leave with General Marcus Ellison. Outside, the two government vehicles waited patiently beneath the fading afternoon sun while curious pedestrians continued watching from across the street. The video recorded earlier outside the coffee shop had already begun spreading across social media, raising questions from thousands of viewers who had witnessed only the beginning of the encounter. They had not yet seen what had happened inside the station, but they sensed there was far more to the story than first appeared. Chief Bennett turned toward Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. Preserve every report, every dispatch recording, every body camera file, and every security camera recording connected to today's incident. Nothing is to be altered or omitted. Mitchell nodded immediately. Yes, Chief. She understood that accountability depended upon transparency, and transparency began with preserving the complete truth. Officer Ryan Collins quietly removed his body camera and placed it into the evidence processing system according to department policy. As he completed the paperwork, he reflected on the small decisions that had shaped the afternoon. He remembered suggesting that the identification be verified. He remembered Marcus asking only for proper procedure. Those simple moments now carried enormous weight. Across the room, Officer Daniel Brooks stood silently near his desk. The confidence that had guided every earlier decision had disappeared, replaced by the unmistakable realization that assumptions had led him far away from the professional standards he believed he represented. He looked toward Marcus once more, expecting anger or condemnation. Instead, Marcus simply offered a respectful nod before turning toward the exit. That quiet gesture affected Brooks more deeply than any harsh criticism could have. Outside the station, several local reporters had begun arriving after hearing radio traffic about unusual activity involving federal officials. Cameras remained pointed toward the entrance, waiting for someone to speak. The Department of Defense representatives politely declined every request for comment, explaining only that there would be no public statement at that time. Chief Bennett made a brief appearance instead. Our department is conducting a full internal review of today's events, he said. Every interaction will be examined carefully because public trust depends upon our willingness to learn from our mistakes. He answered no further questions before returning inside. Later that evening, the department initiated a formal administrative review to evaluate whether established verification procedures had been followed during the encounter. The review focused on policy, decision-making, communication, and training rather than speculation. Supervisors understood that meaningful accountability required careful examination of facts instead of emotional reactions. Meanwhile, General Marcus Ellison arrived safely at the Pentagon, where several senior military leaders greeted him with visible relief. Lieutenant General Rebecca Morrison smiled as he entered the conference room. "We have been trying to reach you all afternoon." Marcus placed his leather portfolio on the table with a calm smile. It turned into a valuable reminder that leadership is tested in unexpected places. Rebecca studied him for a moment. "I heard you remained remarkably composed." Marcus looked toward the window overlooking the Capitol. "People remember how we respond when circumstances become difficult. I wanted them to remember patience instead of pride." Back in Arlington, Officer Brooks sat alone after his shift had ended, replaying every conversation in his mind. For the first time in many years, he asked himself a question he had never seriously considered before. How many opportunities to understand another person had been lost because he believed his first impression was already the complete truth? Sometimes the greatest consequence of a mistake is not public embarrassment. Sometimes it is the private realization that character begins to grow only when certainty finally gives way to humility. Several weeks later, the afternoon that had begun as an ordinary walk through Arlington had quietly become part of the department's training program. New recruits entering the academy no longer watched the recordings to identify a famous military leader. They watched them to study something far more important. Every instructor paused the video at the same moment, just before assumptions replaced verification, and asked a single question. What should have happened next? The answers gradually changed from class to class. Verify the identification. Listen before deciding. Respect every person equally. Follow procedure instead of instinct. The lesson was no longer about one encounter. It had become a reminder that professionalism begins long before authority is exercised. Officer Ryan Collins continued serving with renewed purpose. He often remembered General Marcus Allison's quiet patience and the dignity he had carried through every misunderstanding. Whenever Collins encountered someone during a traffic stop or routine conversation, he made certain to slow down, ask one more question, and allow facts to replace assumptions. His fellow officers noticed the difference. So did the people he met. Chief Harold Bennett expanded the department's annual ethics training, emphasizing that public confidence could never depend solely upon policies written inside manuals. It depended upon the choices officers made during ordinary moments when nobody expected history to be watching. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell helped develop new verification procedures for encounters involving military, federal, and government credentials, ensuring that future questions would be answered through communication instead of speculation. The changes were practical, but their purpose reached far beyond paperwork. They reflected a commitment to earning trust one decision at a time. As for Officer Daniel Brooks, he accepted the findings of the administrative review with quiet humility. The experience had challenged beliefs he had carried for years without ever examining them. Growth did not arrive overnight, nor did it erase the consequences of poor judgment. But it began with an honest willingness to recognize that confidence without fairness could never become true professionalism. Months later, Brooks attended one of the department's community meetings. During the discussion, he stood before local residents and spoke with unexpected sincerity. The hardest lesson I have learned is that the first story we tell ourselves about another person is not always the truth. Respect begins when we are willing to keep listening. There was no applause. None was needed. Honest reflection often speaks more quietly than celebration. At the Pentagon, General Marcus Allison returned to the demanding responsibilities of military leadership. He never spoke publicly about that afternoon, never sought interviews, and never asked for recognition. When colleagues mentioned the incident, he simply smiled and changed the subject toward the mission ahead. For him, leadership had never been about proving personal importance. It had always been about strengthening the institutions entrusted to protect others. One Saturday morning, several months later, Marcus once again walked through Arlington wearing ordinary civilian clothes. Near the same intersection, he noticed a young boy helping his younger sister gather school supplies that had fallen from a backpack onto the sidewalk. Marcus knelt beside them, picked up a notebook, and handed it back with a warm smile. The boy looked up and asked, "Mister, were you in the army?" Marcus nodded gently. "Yes." The child smiled. "My teacher says real leaders help people even when nobody is watching." Marcus smiled back. "Your teacher sounds very wise." As he continued walking beneath the American flag moving softly in the breeze, the city looked exactly as it had before, yet something had quietly changed. Not because one respected general had finally been recognized, but because a difficult day had reminded many people that dignity should never depend upon appearance, assumptions, or status. Honor is not revealed by the rank someone wears. It is revealed by the respect they choose to give others before they know who is standing in front of them.